Welcome to Tumblr Stories, inspired by you. Thank you for sharing your ideas online. This wouldn't be possible without you. Hope you enjoy.
Ocean Forest, written and narrated by Leah. Let's go to the forest. Alex looked up from her book, skepticism written across her face. Why? It's terrifying out there. No, it's not. Not really, Alyssa said as she opened her arms and fell backwards on the bed. I went in a few days ago, but I didn't get very far. I had to get Mom when she got that flat tire. Alex nodded slowly and closed her book, remembering Jane's panic when she had almost crashed on the highway and couldn't get in touch with Alyssa. Then realization dawned on her and she stared incredulously at Alyssa. Seriously? You went into the forest alone? Weren't you scared? A little, Alyssa said with a shrug. I think it's good to be a little scared though. It makes you more focused and you're more aware. How far in did you go? Alyssa rolled on her side to face Alex and whispered,
I almost touched the orange marker post.
A wicked smile crossed her face and she saw Alex's interest grow. She held her thumb and forefinger centimeters away from each other and said, I was this close to touching it and my alarm went off. She flopped back on her bed and stared at the ceiling. I had a gut feeling that something was wrong when I looked at the phone, so I left. And when I got close enough to the banks, I got Mom's missed calls. She closed her eyes and muttered, I can't wait to go back. Alyssa stared at the spot in the ceiling and hesitantly asked, Will you come with me this time? Alex opened and closed her mouth, but no words came. She wanted to go because it sounded like a great adventure, like she always read about, but the warnings from her younger years played on repeat. The forest is dangerous. Kids wander in without adult supervision and they don't ever come out. Anything beyond the white markers is too far to traverse without a larger company. Don't ever go unsupervised. There are monstrous things in the forest that can hurt you even if you come back out. Alex stared at Alyssa's profile, this brave girl who she fell in love with the moment they met, who talked about her skin knees with pride and her love of exploration that stirred Alex with wonder. Alyssa always included her in her pursuits because she knew that Alex would read 1,000 books about going into the unknown and having a grand adventure, but given the chance, she would opt out of it. Their friendship had turned into mutual love over time, and they were inseparable. Mostly. So, will you? Alyssa asked, coming to sit beside Alex. I told Mom we were spending the weekend together, so if you tell your parents the same thing, we can go and they won't miss us, even if we're gone for a day or two. Are you sure? Are you sure we'll be okay and we'll make it back? Alex asked. I'm like 60% sure, Alyssa said with a chuckle. I bought flashlights and extra batteries, and I have snacks in case you get hungry, and you have the gallon water container, so we can use that. Please say yes. I want you to share this with me. Please, please, please. Alex hung her head in defeat and gave a silent nod. Alyssa jumped up and down with glee and pulled Alex to stand up and hug her. She cupped her face and stared into her brown eyes. I promise you won't regret this, she said, and kissed her. Alex waved a hand to Alyssa as she pulled up to the ocean entrance. It was eerily quiet under the cover of night, and she was getting anxious, waiting for Alyssa to park and join her. She adjusted her backpack, carrying the provisions for the journey, like dried fruits and nuts, jerky, and a first aid kit, just in case. Alyssa had taken charge of getting little lanterns to help guide them back out of the ocean, and she had several flashlights and backup batteries in her backpack. She gave Alex a hug when they met up at the gate, and they walked down a little way to a hole that she had made in the fence earlier that day. Do I even want to know how you managed that? Alex asked with a chuckle. I have my ways, Alyssa replied, and pushed the gate to start their adventure. They walked back towards the familiar Ocean Park entrance, passing the signs reminding visitors to keep to the marked trails and to refrain from going past the tree markers without a guide. Alyssa grabbed Alex's hand and gave her a little squeeze of reassurance, but Alex was still anxious and worried. Are you sure we'll be okay? She asked again, for what seemed like the 100th time. Babe, I'm here to protect you, don't worry. I even brought flare guns, just in case it gets too dark or if we need to be rescued. I feel like the worst thing that will happen is getting poison ivy on my ass trying to pee in the dark. They both laughed at that, and Alex felt herself loosening up and tried to tell herself that her fear was just excitement. Their path took them to the first set of trees, painted white to mark the border between civilization and the wild. Alyssa broke into a huge grin and stepped past the row of trees. Alex took a steadying breath and followed, grateful that it was a full moon and there was at least some illumination. The next territorial markers were bright orange that seemed at least a foot higher than the ones they last saw. Alex turned to look back and tried to find the white painted trees, but she couldn't see them anymore. She guessed they were at least 10 feet away, and the trees seemed to be getting closer and closer to her. She turned and saw Alyssa put something on the ground and hurried to catch up. "What's that?" she asked, watching intensely as Alyssa was fidgeting with something in her hands. "These are our breadcrumbs," she said smugly. "I bought them online and tested them out a week ago. They're battery and solar powered, and what's great is they are motion activated, so they'll save the battery until necessary. When we're coming back, I'll activate the ones closest to us and it'll trigger the others to light up so we can be sure we're on the right track. Pretty cool, right?" "Yeah, looks like you thought of everything," Alex said, looking around and rubbing the goosebumps from her biceps. "What if an animal gets at it though? Then what?" "I thought of that too. I found an animal repellent that I've been spraying around the area I'm leaving them. It doesn't hurt them so much, but it smells really gross to their sensitive noses, and they'll avoid it. Just trust me and enjoy the adventure." Alyssa pulled Alex into a hug and patted her head. "I'm not gonna let anything happen to you," she said into Alex's ear. "I love you too much to let that happen." She gave her a kiss and took her hand to start walking farther into the dense trees. Alyssa put her hand out and Alex stopped short of hitting it. She was about to protest when Alyssa motioned for her to be quiet and pointed to the right. There was a bunny hunched over a pile of berries, calmly eating but constantly on guard, with its ears perked up and twitching. Smiles brightened both their faces and they watched in awe. The bunny this far into the forest was as big as a fully grown German Shepherd dog. "It's huge," whispered Alex in amazement. Alyssa just nodded with a huge grin, still staring at the bunny. They had learned about the animals that lived in the ocean and how they are larger than the animals in the developed areas. The oceans were so guarded because the animals there were completely wild and they grew more than 20 times the rate of normal animals. It was still unknown why they didn't venture outside the ocean's limit, but humanity was grateful that they weren't prey to them. The bunny finished its meal and started hopping away when it suddenly stopped and its ears perked up. It looked around, searching for the source of an unheard noise, when its gaze landed on the two girls. It turned to face them and took 2 tentative steps toward them. They stood as still as possible, and Alex saw something move out of the corner of her eye. She turned to look and saw Alyssa's hand reaching out and saw her walking towards the animal. The bunny inched closer and its nose twitched as it tried to close the distance between Alyssa's reach. Suddenly, it yanked its head back and hopped away in a hurry. Alyssa's hand was frozen in midair, and then she let it fall along with her head. She turned to look at Alex, who was frozen in fear, and her face was blank. "Are you okay?" Alyssa asked, waving her hand in front of Alex's face. "Are you okay?" Alex shouted, balling her fists at her sides. "You can't just go reaching out to giant animals. What if it had bitten off your hand or your entire arm? Are you insane?" They both stood staring at each other, not saying anything for what felt like forever. Alyssa finally broke the silence with a belly laugh and said, "I'm totally fine. I guess we know for sure that the animal repellent works." "You're not off the hook, Liz. I was terrified for you. You can't do shit like that. We don't know anything about these animals or what they're capable of, and I don't want you to get hurt." Alyssa walked up to Alex and held her hand and stared into her eyes. "I'm sorry. I really wasn't thinking, and I'm really sorry that it upset you. Why don't we take a break? We've been walking for what feels like hours, and you can use a break." Alex nodded and let Alyssa lead her to a clearing close to where the bunny was eating before. Alyssa took out a blanket from her bag and laid it down beside some bushes and set her backpack on the outer edge. She helped Alex with her bag and got some granola mix bars for them. Alex looked closely at the bush and noticed that there were berries growing inside the brambles. She reached in and grabbed a handful and offered it to Alyssa. "Do you think it'll be okay to eat?" "I think so. The bunny didn't seem to have a problem with it, so I think we should be fine." Alex reached in for another handful, then joined Alyssa on the blanket. They ate in silence, the events of the past few minutes hanging between them. "I'm really sorry," Alyssa said quietly. "I know that I'm impulsive and I take a lot of risks, and I'm really sorry for worrying you." "Thank you," Alex said in response. She reached out and placed her hand on top of Alyssa's, and Alyssa lifted it and gave it a kiss. "I know that I worry too much, but I feel even more on edge with it being just us two here. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to you." Alyssa nodded. "No, seriously," Alex said, a smile entering her voice. "I'm totally clueless here without you, so don't you go getting hurt or anything." "Yes, ma'am," Alyssa said with a mock salute. They walked for hours, ambling through the trees and staying alert to the sounds of the forest. It had gotten pitch black, and they had to use 2 sets of flashlights in order to see where they were going. Alyssa pointed out glowing eyes watching them as they walked, and Alex held her arm even tighter, grateful for her calm reassurances and her boldness. She had asked Alyssa to spray their limbs and their backpacks with the animal repellent, and it eased her mind that they were not being approached. Alyssa pointed out a gap between the trees, and they headed for it. "Maybe we can rest for a little. I can't tell if it's morning or not, and I'm definitely going to need to sleep before we start heading back," she said. They walked into a clearing that was overrun with wild grass that came up to their knees. Alyssa put down her backpack, and Alex did the same, trying to figure out how best to set up the blanket to sleep comfortably for a few hours. They decided to stomp on the grass to flatten it a little, but it barely made a difference. "Maybe we can just sit up against a tree trunk and sleep in shifts so we can stay on guard," Alex said. Alyssa agreed and bent to get her backpack when she heard the forest moving around them. There was the echo of a snort and the sound of very heavy hooves on the grass. They shunned their flashlights toward the area the sound seemed to come from and held on to each other. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder and louder until they stopped in front of them. 2 hooves that seemed like tree trunks of their own materialized out of the darkness with the illumination of their flashlights, and the face of the largest stag they had ever seen bent low to inspect them. Its legs were taller than a 5-story building, and its head was so massive it seemed like a full-size SUV would fit in its pupil alone. The antlers stretched on for miles with their strength and magnificence, and the girls just held each other close and stared in awe. The stag turned its nose toward them and let out a smooth breath, showering them with a warm gust of wind. It gave them a small nod and turned away, the sound of the ocean coming back to their ears. It was only then that they realized how quiet their encounter with the stag was. It was as if the entire ocean waited, holding its breath so as not to disturb it. "Wow," Alyssa said, her voice barely a whisper. "I feel like I've met God. Is that weird?" she asked, looking at Alex. Alex was silently nodding, tears streaking her cheeks. "I feel as if I'm an ant, and so insignificant, but also important, because it took the time to look at me," she said, wiping at her cheeks. "I feel so alive," she said with a chuckle. "I'm way too happy to go to sleep now." "Me too," Alyssa agreed. They found their backpacks in the grass and put them on, heading back towards the nearest breadcrumb, illuminating their way back. They were animatedly talking about their encounter with the stag when something brushed against Alyssa's left leg. She looked down at her leg but didn't see anything. She shrugged it off and continued walking. Not long after, Alex stopped and looked to her right. "Did you hear that?" she asked Alyssa. "Hear what?" Alyssa asked. "I heard something, like slithering, over there." Alex responded and pointed towards her right. "I didn't hear anything, but I felt something go by my leg a bit ago." "How much farther until the next breadcrumb?" Alex asked, glancing nervously around. "Just up ahead," Alyssa said, and they started walking towards a tiny glow in the distance. Alex's uneasy feeling diminished as they approached the light, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. "Let's hurry, Liz," she said, shakiness creeping in her voice. "I might be paranoid, but I feel like something is watching us, and I don't like it. Yeah, no problem, Alyssa said, looking around for the next light source. She saw it up ahead to the left and pointed it out to Alex. We just have to get 10 more and we'll be close enough to the tree markers to see without flashlights. Alyssa saw the relief in Alex's face, but didn't want to show her how nervous she was feeling too. She had felt the animals were getting closer to them when hours ago they were so far away that it seemed she and Alex were the only ones in the ocean. She didn't want to say anything and increase Alex's worry, so she gave her hand a squeeze and started walking towards the light. Something darted past their path in a blur of white. Then they heard panting, and a fox as large as a city bus ran in the direction of the blur. Alyssa guessed it was a bunny and hoped it wasn't the one she had almost touched. The adrenaline brought them both to attention, and they darted for the light now. The contents of their backpacks were being jostled around and caused a lot of noise as they ran. The light grew brighter as they got closer, and Alyssa barely stopped to pick it up so they could continue running. Alex searched the darkness and saw the small glow of the next breadcrumb and shouted, "Over here!" They ran towards the light, trying to navigate their way over and around branches and roots that they barely paid attention to before. This next light was at the base of a tree, and they stopped to catch their breath. They were doubled over and panting with exhaustion. "Do we need to reapply the spray?" Alex asked between breaths. Alyssa pulled the backpack to face her to get another bottle of animal repellent, and her face fell. The zipper had gotten undone, and as she was running, supplies had fallen out. She squatted down to take inventory of what was left as Alex looked into the distance, spreading the flashlight's beams across the trees in a sweeping motion. "There's barely enough left in the can," Alyssa said, giving the can a shake, but not feeling anything. "And the flare guns are still here, but there's no more batteries or extra flashlights." Alex looked down at her with worry in her eyes. "How many flares do you have?" "2 for each gun, so 4 in total." "Okay. I'll lead the way with my flashlight, and you can load the flare and carry one in your hand in case we have to use it," Alex said, surprised at the strength in her voice. "Let's worry about the repellent later and just get out of here." Alyssa loaded the flare gun and put the extra 2 flares in each of her pockets, cursing fashion designers for making such tiny pockets into ladies' clothing. She double-checked the zipper and, finding it secure, put her backpack on and looked around. "Which way do we go now?" "Here," Alex motioned to the small glow, "but let's try to be quiet, okay?" Alyssa nodded and started walking in tow, looking around for any signs of something watching them. They walked slowly, stopping after the snap of every twig to make sure nothing was alerted by their presence. It felt agonizingly long, walking to the next 4 breadcrumbs, and the fatigue started to settle in. "Can we stop for a second?" Alyssa asked. "My feet are killing me." "Can you make it to the next light? If the repellent hasn't worn off the area, I'll feel much safer there," Alex said. Alyssa gave a nod and followed her to the next light. As they approached the light, it started flickering. No, not flickering, but fading in and out. They squinted in the dim glow of the flashlight and saw that a moth the size of their palms was trying to approach it and bouncing off its dome.
Alyssa reached out to swat it away, but it flew up out of sight.
They sat down at the base of the shrub, and Alex turned off the flashlight to save the battery.
"What an adventure," Alyssa said into the darkness.
"I'll say that when we're out of this place," Alex responded. She retrieved a pack of jerky and reached around in the dark to place some pieces in Alyssa's hand. She brought it to her mouth and chewed it, savoring the taste and the moisture her saliva produced. She realized just then that she hadn't drank anything since they came in. "How long do you think we've been in here?" Alex asked. Alyssa looked up to try and see the moon, but the canopy of trees barely let in any light. "I feel like we've only been here for an hour, but sometimes it feels like we've been here for days. I think my phone fell out of my bag when we were running, so I'm clueless." "Why?" "I just realized I haven't drank anything since we came in, and I know I have to hydrate pretty often." Alex fumbled around in her backpack and pulled out a reusable bottle and gave it a gentle shake. The water felt completely full, and she took a sip. It didn't give her any sense of being refreshed, so she passed it in the dark to Alyssa. Alyssa reached around with her fingers, grazing Alex's hand, and took a sip of the water. I wonder if those berries did anything to us, she said quietly. I feel fine, a little on edge given the circumstances, but fine, Alex said. Okay, let's keep going, Alyssa said as she pushed her way from the trunk to stand. They quietly walked towards the next light in the distance, having a slightly brighter view as a breeze overhead rustled the leaves and some light filtered down to the ocean floor. Alex led the way with the flashlight, and Alyssa tightened her grip on the flare gun, her pointer finger at the ready in anticipation. They approached a small hill with what looked like roots emerging from the base. Alex carefully stepped over the roots, but Alyssa's playful nature won out, and she started hopping over them. She was just about to jump over the last root when it moved. It twitched and moved towards her in the slightest way, but she was caught off guard and fell on it. It didn't hurt the way she thought it would. It was hard, but also felt soft, like freshly mowed grass or day-old shaved legs. She pushed away from it, but it came alive and flew out of her reach. She looked up to see where it had gone to when a force slammed into her back and pushed her into Alex, who had already walked ahead of her. They both fell down and quickly turned around to see the source of the force. Almost in slow motion, the hill began to transform. They realized it was a mouse the size of a horse, with 6 tails instead of 1, and that's what they had thought were roots. Its body was compressed into a large round bottom, the hill. Its front paws were doubled and folded at odd angles as if it had extra joints. But the strangest mutation was its head. There were 2 sharp teeth extending down past its nose and lips, but the rest of the face was covered in eyes that shifted in all directions. Those eyes slowly started to focus on the 2 girls until they could see their shocked faces reflected over 15 times back at them. The mouse twitched its nose, smelling the air and catching their scent. It scrambled over towards them and sniffed the air, pawing at the air above their heads. They ducked out of the path of its paws and slowly backed away. It was turning its head side to side now, trying to figure out where they had gone, when a stone flew from Alex to hit it on its back. "Come on, hurry," she said to Alyssa, as the mouse reared up on its hind legs and let out a shrill screech. They ran towards a tiny glow in the distance while trying to avoid overgrown roots and rocks in their path. The mouse was bounding towards them, clattering through the grass and smashing the overgrown roots under its paws. Alyssa glanced back to see it was closing the distance between her and Alex. She didn't turn around in time and tripped over a small boulder with a horrified scream. Her hands splayed out to catch her fall, and she dropped the flare gun and the extra flare in the commotion. Alex stopped short when she heard Alyssa scream. She turned around and ran towards her, protectively covering Alyssa's head while the mouse scratched at her feet. Alyssa kicked at the mouse, catching it on its nose, and it reared back and held it protectively. Its front paws scratched at the air as Alyssa's right leg kicked at it. The mouse's claw made 4 gashes from her knee to her ankle, and she screamed out in pain, tears welling in her eyes. Alex stared in shock at the blood flowing from Alyssa's leg, and before she knew what she was doing, she threw herself in between Alyssa and the mouse's claws. She felt the impact of the claws ripping her backpack to shreds and knew that it wouldn't be long before she was facing the same fate. She looked into Alyssa's tear-filled eyes and whispered, "I love you." Before Alyssa could respond with her own declaration of love, Alex was crushing her lips with a forceful kiss. The kiss turned salty as tears flowed from both of them. Alex withdrew from the kiss with a blood-curdling scream as she felt the claws of the mouse tearing at the flesh on her back. She broke into sobs as the mouse kept slashing at her back. Alyssa's scream mingled with Alex's, and she shouted and pleaded to the darkness for help. "Help! Anyone! Please help us!" she shouted. "Hold on, baby. Please hold on," she pleaded as Alex dissolved into tears, unable to defend her now torn back. Alex felt searing pain from the many gashes on her back, and she heard Alyssa's desperate cries for help and her words of comfort. She felt the darkness closing on her and knew she was powerless to stop it, so she succumbed, hoping that the darkness would take away the pain. Alyssa looked down to see that Alex was unconscious, and she shook her shoulders trying to wake her. "Alex! Al! Wake up, baby!" Her voice came out choked as she whispered, "I can't survive without you. I can't leave you here. Al, please wake up." But Alex's limp body didn't move a muscle. Alyssa let out a horrific scream at the mouse, and it sniffed the air, coming closer to Alex's body. "No! Get away from her!" Alyssa snarled, possessively putting her hands over Alex's torn back. The mouse reared up again to strike at her, but before its paws could collide with her, it was knocked forcefully into the trunk of a tree to her left. Alyssa looked to the right to see what had intervened, and she saw the hooves of the buck they had seen earlier. Its head made the descent, and its eyes found her face and then saw Alex's back. It sniffed at Alex's wound and then withdrew its head. Alyssa heard the mouse scuttling through the grass on its way over to them and saw, in an instant, the buck lift in its hoof to land squarely on its head. The mouse made one last squeal before it was silenced forever. Alyssa had turned her head away from the death for fear that she and Alex might be next. She was also hoping that the buck's instinct to protect them was greater than any instinct to harm them. As she was thinking this, its head resurfaced and its mouth grew ever closer. Alyssa shielded Alex as best she could and hunched over, anticipating the pain from being eaten alive. The pain never came. Instead, a warm liquid fell on her head and spilled down her back. She opened her eyes to look at what was happening and realized that the buck's saliva was coating her and Alex. It spilled into the grass, and flowers started blooming where it had landed. She noticed that the pain in her leg had been reduced to a little ache and was surprised to see that it had healed over, leaving 4 dark lines where she had been injured. She looked closer at Alex's back and saw that it was starting to heal as well. Her skin was puckered and pink, and similar dark lines were overlapping each other. Alyssa felt a pang of guilt at seeing Alex's back and looked away. She felt a hand squeeze hers and looked down to see Alex looking up at her with wonder. "Hey you," Alex said dreamily. "Did we die and go to paradise? Why is paradise so dark?" Then her eyes widened in recognition, and Alyssa started laughing and crying. She gathered Alex into a big hug and squeezed her tight. "I don't know how, but that buck from before saved us and killed the mouse. Does your back hurt at all?" Alyssa said, running her hands on the smoothness of Alex's back. "No, it feels kind of itchy, but it doesn't hurt. I think it's been saved us somehow," Alyssa said with a laugh, grateful to be alive and talking to Alex again. "Gross, but I'll take it," Alex said with a laugh of her own. They were so engrossed with each other that they didn't notice that the buck had used its left antler to dig their sitting place out of the ground. In what felt like the fastest elevator ride, they were lifted higher and higher until they extended farther than the tops of the trees they were just under. They looked around in wonder as the ocean swayed in a sea of green leaves dappled by sunlight. The buck started walking towards the city, and Alex called out, "Liz, I can see your car from here." They both erupted in laughter at the age-old joke and held each other, each one happy to have the other. The tops of the trees started getting smaller as they neared the gate, and soon the buck was lowering its head, tilting slightly to the left. They gently slid down its antlers and were deposited beside one of the white-painted trees. They turned to thank it, but were met with an empty ocean, miles of trees, and nothing but the sounds of birds going about their day. "If I didn't know better, I'd say we both dreamt that," Alyssa said. "I'd agree on that mutual hallucination if my back wasn't so itchy and if I couldn't see the scars on your leg," Alex responded. As they walked towards the entrance of the ocean park, debating how they would best explain away their absence and their new wounds, Jane walked up to them with a smile. "So, did you decide to go on an ocean tour?" she asked, beaming. "Yeah," Alyssa responded. "But we have to grab something out of the car. See you inside?" Jane nodded and walked past them. They ran to the car to Alex's phone, seeing that only 10 hours had passed while they were in the ocean. "Bizarre, isn't it?" Alyssa muttered. "Yeah," Alex responded. "And next time we're sticking to the guided paths," she said, playfully shoving Alyssa. Alyssa brought her in for a kiss, grateful to have her alive and in her arms again. So this story was inspired by Snake on Tumblr. Snake says, "Imagine if the oceans were replaced by forests, and if you went into the forest, the trees would get taller the deeper you went, and there'd be thousands of undiscovered species, and you could effectively walk across the ocean. But the deeper you went, the darker it would be, and the animals would get progressively scarier and more dangerous. And instead of whales, there'd be giant deer, and just wow. And Rad Glower says, "You have a beautiful imagination." And I second that.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Tumblr Stories Inspired by You. If you have an idea for a story, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you next time. Bye.